We experienced an attack, and I understand it might sound scary and kind of silly, but that's exactly what happened. It was like a big, fast storm hitting us. They came at us with force, and before we could figure out what to do, they were gone. I wish I could tell you we were in a strong castle with big walls to protect us, or maybe even a sturdy fort. But nope, we were in a mobile home, at the time. I was parked in Arizona, right near the desert, and I think I might have been on land that wasn't mine. Technically speaking, maybe it was reservation land. I didn't bother anyone, and no one bothered me. It was perfect for someone like me, who gets really nervous in social situations and doesn't have a lot of things to keep busy with. Somehow, even way out there in the middle of nowhere, I managed to make a few friends. Tom and George were like family to me, even though those aren't their real names. Their actual names are just as ordinary. You wouldn't guess that they come from families who've lived on this land for generations, fighting against people trying to take it away. Maybe they didn't have much to do either. Why else would they be hanging out with me in a beat-up mobile home? We had a cozy fire going. It glowed all night long. We sipped on some drinks, moved around to the music, and George even introduced me to some of his single friends. They didn't stay long, though. I'm thankful George and Tom stayed with me, even though they might regret it now. They probably wish they'd just gone home that night. They wouldn't have had to deal with what happened. They wouldn't have had to defend themselves. It was probably around 2 a.m. when we heard noises outside and something was moving around near the vehicle. We were all sitting at the table, playing cards. Tom noticed it first. His eyes darted to the windows. Before we even knew what was happening, he grabbed a baseball bat and went outside to scare away any coyotes. We thought it might be coyotes. You know, they sometimes wander around here. They usually run off when they hear noise. Tom could be really loud. Seeing him all excited always made George and me giggle. So after a little while, we followed him outside. I remember George asking if we had missed the fun. By the time our feet touched the ground, Tom had gone silent. But he didn't say anything. He didn't even turn around. He was staring at something on the opposite side of the faintly lit fire. Curious, George and I peered over his shoulders to see what had caught his attention. It looked like a person, I guess. Maybe. I think they were humans. Humans who grew up in the desert. Maybe. Or maybe they were raised by wild animals. The person creature was naked and hunched over on the ground. We couldn't see their face clearly because of the flickering flames. So George shouted to scare them away, and another creature person hurried over to join the first one. This one was a woman. We could see her face. It looked like a bat or a small animal or something. Her nose was split open like a blooming flower. Her teeth were uneven, and her lips were pulled back, showing a little bit of gums at the top and bottom of her mouth. If she had eyes, I couldn't see them. George became quiet too. I was the first one to run away. Tom followed me, and George came last. Then he locked the door behind us. We stood there staring at it and breathing hard for what felt like a whole minute. Then something slammed against the door. And it wasn't soft, like flesh. It was hard and made a cracking sound when it hit the wall. We found out the next morning that it was a log from the fire. They grabbed it while it was still burning. Then they started throwing stones. At first it sounded like hail, and there were howling noises, like wolves. As the creatures yelled and screamed outside, they threw anything they could find. At the mobile home, the windows broke. They shattered into pieces. We were afraid they might try to set the place on fire, but they didn't. Or maybe they weren't even trying to hurt us. Who knows? Maybe they just wanted to show they were strong. We struggled to keep the door blocked and the windows covered. Then a rock flew in and hit George on the head. He didn't fall, but he stumbled. Afterward, Tom kept shouting at them. But I don't think the creatures outside understood any of the languages Tom spoke, but he threatened them anyway. The creatures became bolder, even if they didn't get any smarter. Soon the sound of stones and logs hitting the walls was replaced by the sound of their hands slapping against the walls. They banged on the walls like they were trying to break in. If they tried, they might have opened the door. An hour later, everything was quiet again. We heard them run back to wherever they came from, disappearing into the mystery of the desert. When we finally opened the door, they were nowhere to be seen, but the walls of my mobile home were dented and covered in dirty handprints. Mud from the desert ground, blood and other gross stuff streaked across the vehicle like paint. None of us said a word that morning, but we cleaned up together, scrubbing the walls with a rag, a gallon of water, and half a bottle of vodka. We worked without making a sound until all the signs of the scary night before were gone. We didn't want to see it anymore. We wanted to believe it was just a bad dream. After that, the boys left, so I stayed until the sun went down. I thought I heard noises outside, so I left right away. I had the vehicle towed, and the company that took it charged me a fine because of the mess inside. It was dirty all over again, and the inside was a mess, smelling like animals and poop. I sold it as fast as I could. That's the truth. That's what happened. But tomorrow I probably won't feel brave enough to talk about it again. What do I think they were? Why did they come after us? And why at that time? Well, I'm not sure exactly what they were. Maybe they were people who lived in the desert for a long time and changed somehow. Or maybe they were creatures we've never seen before. As for why they came after us and why that night, I wish I had an answer. Maybe they were just curious, or maybe they thought we were intruders. It's a mystery, really. On a bright morning in Eastern Virginia, I embarked on an exciting kayaking journey and my plan to paddle about 30 miles downriver, a route that promised adventure. At every bend, the water rushed past me, eager to carry me on my 2-day, 1-night expedition. I parked my car at the journey's end and hitched a ride with a friend who dropped me off upstream. Although I was no stranger to kayaking, this was my first solo trip. Little did I know it would be an experience to remember, one that kept me away from water for 5 long years. The area I navigated was wild and remote, untouched by the hustle and bustle of city life. Thick forests enveloped the riverbanks, their dense undergrowth challenging any attempt to venture off the beaten path. Trails were scarce, making hiking a daunting task for anyone brave enough to attempt it. Despite its rugged beauty, the landscape was not without its mysteries. Many would say it was the perfect setting for a Bigfoot sighting, with its secluded woods and winding waterways. But what I encountered was far stranger than any mythical creature from folklore. As I paddled along the river, everything seemed to be going just as planned. Sure, I hit a snag when I got stuck on a fallen tree, and my kayak took on some water, but I managed to free myself. No harm done. At lunchtime, I simply emptied out the water and continued on my way. I paddled a bit farther than I'd expected on the first day, and the sun was starting to dip toward the horizon when I finally decided to set up camp. As I pulled my kayak onto the shore, I noticed something stirring beneath the water's surface. It moved so smoothly without making a sound, disappearing into the depths before I could catch a good look. Whatever it was, it definitely wasn't a fish. In these parts, we have these cool creatures called hellbenders. They're like big aquatic salamanders and can weigh up to 5 pounds. Spotting one in the wild is rare and special. It means the river's healthy. Hellbenders usually hang out in shallow water near big rocks, and they're not scary at all. They're just doing their thing, minding their own business. After spotting the mysterious creature in the water, I didn't dwell on it too much. Instead, I focused on setting up my camp for the night and preparing my dinner. The sun had almost disappeared, but the moon, full and brightened, cast a soft blue light over the landscape, making everything seem magical. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves, creating the only sound in the peaceful valley. This was why I loved being outdoors. The tranquility was like a soothing melody. By this point, I was no stranger to camping, so I knew the importance of keeping my food safe from hungry animals, especially bears. While they did make me a little nervous, I'd never had any trouble with them before. I made sure to store my food in a dry sack and hung it high in a tree about 100 yards away from my tent. From my campsite, I could just about see the tree where my food was providing me with a sense of security as I settled in for the night. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with the hues of orange and pink, I noticed something stirring on the water's surface. At first I thought it might be a large branch or tree that had fallen into the river, but as darkness crept in, it became harder to see clearly. I squinted, trying to make out the shape in the fading light. Suddenly, it moved again, rippling through the water like a giant snake, and for a moment, I almost believed it could be a sea serpent. But that couldn't be right, could it? Sea serpents didn't belong in the rivers of Virginia. It had to be my tired eyes playing tricks on me. After a long day of paddling with that comforting thought in mind, I prepared myself for a night of rest. As I drifted off to sleep, the mystery of the creature in the river faded from my mind. Little did I know the mystery was far from over. In the dead of night, a strange sound jolted me awake. Something was sniffing around my tent, rustling through the grass outside. My heart raced as I listened intently, but strangely, I couldn't hear any footsteps, and fear gripped me as I imagined the worst. A bear prowling around my campsite. I lay perfectly still, hoping and praying the creature would move on. I had no food inside my tent, not even a faint scent to attract it. For what felt like an eternity, the creature lingered, its presence unsettling. Eventually, it seemed to lose interest and departed, brushing against my kayak as it left. I remained inside my tent, frozen with fear for another 15 minutes before summoning the courage to investigate. When I finally emerged with a flashlight, there was no sign of the creature, no trace of its presence, except for one unsettling detail. As I scanned the area, my eyes fell upon the tree where I had hung my food. Something was wrapped around its base, slithering and climbing upward. In the dim light, it resembled a giant snake, unlike any native to our region. So I stood there dumbfounded, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. This was like nothing I had ever encountered before. Leaving the safety of my camp, I ventured closer to get a better look at the mysterious creature. My curiosity outweighed my fear, but I made sure to keep a safe distance. It seemed fixated on reaching my food bag, so I reasoned that as long as I stayed back, I should be okay. And though I was scared, I inched closer until I could see clearly. To my astonishment, it wasn't a snake climbing the tree, it was a salamander. But not just any salamander. It resembled a hellbender, only 10 times larger. Its body stretched about 12 to 15 feet, with a middle part that looked more like a snake than a typical salamander. It was as if a sea serpent had grown legs and decided to explore the land. It sounds unbelievable, I know, but I swear it's true. Unfortunately, the creature managed to reach my food bag, treating itself to an easy meal right before my eyes. I watched helplessly, too afraid to intervene, and once it had its fill, the creature waddled back down to the riverbank and disappeared beneath the water's surface. The next morning, I felt uneasy about returning to the river. Every splash and rustle made me jump, fearing the creature's return. Thankfully, I didn't encounter it again on my journey back to the car, but I couldn't shake the memory of that strange encounter from my mind. My mind tries to make sense of what I saw. Maybe it was just an incredibly big hellbender. Sometimes animals grow really large when there's lots of food, and they have plenty of space to roam. But then how do I explain its long body? Do hellbenders get stretched out when they grow so big? Or could it have been something completely different lurking in the river? These questions buzz around my head like busy bees searching for answers that seem just out of reach. Meet Cindy, a woman who loves nature more than anything else in the world. She's a park ranger, and her favorite place to be is in the Redwood National and State Parks. These parks are like a treasure chest, full of forests, beaches, and grasslands along the coast of Northern California. So Cindy spends most of her time there, making sure everything is safe and sound. Cindy has a routine she follows every day. She checks on the wildlife, makes sure the trails are clear, and does all the usual stuff that park rangers do. And she's seen a lot of strange things in the woods over the years. When you spend as much time outdoors as she does, you're bound to come across some unusual sights. But one day, something really strange happened. It was like the animals in the forest were acting differently than usual. Normally, they have a rhythm to their movements, like they're all part of a big dance. But on this day, everything changed. The squirrels, usually so playful and energetic, were darting about like they were in a hurry to be somewhere else. The birds, who usually fill the air with their chirping and singing, were strangely silent. Even the deer, usually so graceful and calm, looked spooked, like they had seen something they couldn't explain. Cindy starts to sense something strange happening in the forest. It's like that feeling you get when you think someone's watching you, but when you turn around, nobody's there. She feels it all the time, especially in one particular part of the forest, so she begins to wonder, could it be poachers? Or maybe some strange sickness affecting the animals? She knows she has to figure it out because it's her job as a ranger, but it's also something she feels personally responsible for. She spends even more time in the forest than usual, searching every nook and cranny. Then one evening, as the mist rolls in, turning the forest into something straight out of a fairy tale, she notices it. Or rather, she doesn't notice it. Things are moving around her branches, swaying leaves, whispering, but there's no wind, no animals in sight, nothing that could explain the movement. It's not random. It feels purposeful, like something is moving with intelligence. It's almost like it's playing a game with her, knowing she can't see it. Cindy has this intuition that it might be some kind of spirit or guardian, something as ancient as the towering redwood trees themselves. It doesn't seem threatening, but it exudes a powerful presence, and she says you can feel it deep in your bones. Cindy doesn't often talk about what happened, but if she did, she'd tell you it wasn't like a big showdown you see in movies. No, this was real life, and real life doesn't always follow a script. She kept feeling this presence, like a giant, silently watching over her. Sometimes she'd be walking along a familiar trail she'd traveled many times before, and suddenly the atmosphere would change. The air would feel different, colder somehow, and she just knew it was there. She couldn't explain it, and she had no proof. No photos, no footprints, but every time the hairs on the back of her neck stood up, telling her it was real, strange things would happen too. A fallen branch blocking a path she was sure was clear the day before, or a spider's web woven in a pattern she'd never seen before, appearing overnight. Even the animals seemed to sense something. They acted differently, showing a kind of respect and giving it space. Cindy once watched as a fox paused, tilting its head as if listening to something she couldn't hear, then chose a different path, avoiding an area where the air felt charged. Cindy often found solace in the embrace of the mighty redwoods. Leaning against their rough bark, she would close her eyes and sense a deep, slow heartbeat pulsating through the earth beneath her feet. One day, Cindy stumbled upon a clear-cut area, a stark contrast to the lush beauty of the forest. It felt like stepping from a dream into a nightmare. The sight of the decimated trees left her shaken. Standing at the edge of destruction, surrounded by stumps and sawdust, Cindy felt a deafening silence engulfing her. In that moment, she realized that the spirit she sensed wasn't just a wanderer. It was a guardian protecting the life that thrived in the forest. As she explored further, Cindy began to decipher the signs left by the spirit. She saw a young tree bending and twisting around obstacles, as if guided by an unseen hand, reaching for sunlight in a graceful arc. She noticed mushrooms arranged in patterns, conveying a message through their placement. It was as if the forest itself was speaking to her, the spirit communicating in a language beyond words. Cindy dedicated more and more of her time to protecting the groves of trees, and it became her mission her whole life. She spoke up for them at meetings, wrote articles, but she never mentioned the spirit she felt. She couldn't prove it, and she worried people wouldn't believe her if she did. Instead, she took them into the forest, showed them its beauty and grandeur. She let them feel the peace and power that flowed through it. Some of them felt something more, something they couldn't explain. They left knowing deep down that the forest was alive in a way that went beyond just plants and animals. For Cindy, the presence of the forest spirit never faded, so she worked alongside it, feeling its guidance with every step. The spirit never revealed itself, never took a visible form, but Cindy didn't need it to. Just knowing it was there was enough. Every night she felt the forest's watchful gaze, and she knew she wasn't alone. She was part of something bigger, something alive and vibrant. So maybe this isn't your typical story about strange creatures, but it's a story about the unknown nonetheless. It's about believing in things we can't see or fully understand. And maybe, just maybe, it'll encourage others to believe a little more in the mysteries of the world around us. Back in college, my friends Ginny, Brett, and I were really into exploring the supernatural. We loved checking out places, hoping to catch something on camera or find evidence of ghosts or aliens. We even wanted to start our own ghost hunting TV show. After lots of research, we decided to visit Roswell, New Mexico in the late 1940s. A mysterious object crashed there, leaving behind strange debris, so we were excited and hopeful that we might find something interesting. I was in charge of filming everything with my video camera. While Jenny and Brett used metal detectors and thermal cameras, we set up our base at a nearby hotel and got ready for our adventure. We waited until nighttime to start our exploration so we wouldn't look silly wandering around in the daytime. Armed with our equipment, we headed out into the woods where the crash had happened. The dark woods felt spooky, but we were excited to see what we might find. As we walked, Jenny's metal detector beeped, indicating something was buried nearby. Brett started digging, hoping to uncover something cool. After digging for a while, he found a strange box buried in the ground. Inside the box, we found something unexpected, shedded skin like a snake's. It was weird, but we were curious to know more. Jenny marked the spot so we wouldn't forget where we found it, and we continued exploring. We wandered into an open field and spotted something moving in the distance. I pointed my camera towards it, but suddenly the camera started acting up. It was frustrating, but we kept our eyes on the figure approaching us. As it got closer, we realized it was a small figure, maybe the size of a child. Thinking it might be a lost kid, I started walking towards it, but before I could see its face, it let out a loud, piercing shriek that hurt our ears. We fell to the ground, covering our ears, unable to move. But I caught a glimpse of the figure picking up the bag of shedded skin before everything went black. When we woke up, we were alone, and the figure was gone, and it felt like a dream. But we knew it wasn't the only evidence we had. The shedded skin was gone too. The next morning, Jenny and Brett didn't remember anything about our encounter. They thought we had stayed in the hotel all night. It was strange, and I felt frustrated that I was the only one who remembered. I checked my camera, hoping to find proof of what happened, but the footage was gone, except for a short clip of me dropping to the ground. Even that disappeared when I tried to show it to Jenny and Brett. To this day, I know what we saw was real, even if nobody else remembers, and it makes me wonder what else is out there that we don't know about.